I want to draw our attention to a passage from near the end of Splinters, where you observe that one lesson you have to keep learning has to do with, quote, the difference between the story of love and the texture of living it, between the story of motherhood and the texture of living it, the story of addiction and the texture of living it, the story of empathy and the texture of living it. In other words, although story gives shape to an experience, it might also simplify it, maybe even distort it. It's in that realm of idea that you were talking about, perhaps. So I'd be curious to hear you share some advice for conveying texture, maybe even contrast to story. And if story is one way of making an experience comprehensible, how do you appeal to readers without relying on it primarily?
Yeah, what a beautiful question. I think so. Part of my answer, I think, has to do with the ways that story and texture work symbiotically. I think it can be quite productive how they put pressure on each other. By that, I mean, you have a story in your mind that you want to tell. I'm thinking particularly about personal nonfiction. You have a story that's drawn from your own experience, and you have some sense of what you're going for, some sense of what's the question you want to interrogate. In this case, I knew that one of the questions I wanted to interrogate was sort of how does one claim beauty that has pain, darkness, grief, guilt sort of inextricably baked into it. You know, I knew from very early on that my daughter's life and experience, which is a beautiful thing to me, was tangled up with a lot of pain and a lot of darkness. So it was sort of like, how does one find a way of relating to beauty that also makes room for all this pain and darkness? So I knew that was one of my driving questions. So I think story and theme kind of give you some of the broad contours of what you're looking for. And I find myself sort of drawn to certain moments that feel like they might help me explore those things. But then I think once I go when I go back into those scenes, when I go back into those memories and I try to write them as scenes, that's when textures kind of comes on the scene to exert its particular pressures. So when I go back into memory when I'm writing, I'm always very embodied and very focused on particulars and very focused on sensation and sensory information. And part of that is because I really want to like re-inhabit a scene in order to be surprised by it. I go into that scene looking for something. Oh, here's what it has to do with the big ideas that I'm exploring. But always, always, if I'm doing it right, the scene has things to share with me that I didn't know I was looking for. So it starts to complicate the story. So it not only brings the kind of texture that's, you know, immersive and makes the text feel lush and all those things, but actually it's kind of complicating the story that I'm telling. So an example of that, like I'm thinking about the first time I went back into the classroom after my daughter was born, she was 6 months old, and I was teaching a class in Denver, a weekend workshop. And I knew I wanted to write about that workshop because what I thought I wanted to write about was this feeling of being intensely torn between my daughter down the block. I'm running down the block, you know, every hour and a half to go nurse her. I wanted to write about being torn between her and the classroom, my students, the work of teaching. So it was that feeling of tornness that I had in my mind. And that was part of the experience. But when I really went back into the scene, there was all this other stuff waiting for me there. Like there was the memory that, you know, I'd expected to feel only halfway present in that classroom. I had expected to feel like most of me was still back there with my daughter. But actually, that's not totally what happened. What happened was that I felt like if I'm gonna be apart from my daughter, I wanna fucking make it worth it, you know? So I'm actually gonna be really fully here. I felt kind of radically present in a way that I never had been before. And that radical presence as a kind of desire to make good on any absence from my daughter was not an emotional experience that I had anticipated. And also it wasn't quite the emotional experience that I remembered. So it was an example of sort of having slotted a certain memory into a certain place in your like emotional filing cabinet, But when you open the memory back up and pull it out, there's actually a lot more written on the page. So to me, that's part of how when you re-engage with the texture of experience, if you're really allowing it to speak back to you, it's going to make the sort of larger level inquiries, the larger level story, a little bit, sometimes a little bit messier, but also a little bit richer and truer.